Star Trek toys of the 1970s. This is episode 25.
You're listening to 70s Trek with Bob Turner and Kelly Casto, the fan podcast that looks at Star Trek in the 1970s. It was the decade that built a franchise.
Yes, it was. Hey, break out your Enterprise playset and strap on your Remco utility belt. Today we're going to get playing. I'm Bob Turner.
And I'm Kelly Casto. Hey, as we record this, it's Christmas time. And I think it's a perfect time then to talk about Star Trek toys.
Oh, and there were some really good ones in the 70s, weren't there? Do you have a favorite, Kelly?
I sure do, but I don't want to say just yet. Let's tell listeners where they can reach us first. You can visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/70s Trek. We'll hope you leave a comment or a question.
You can also find 70s Trek on iTunes. Just search 70s Trek in the podcast area. We also hope you'll leave us a rating or a review, and that helps others find our show.
The Star Trek USS Enterprise gift set with command chair, console, 3 telescreen cards, and 5 Star Trek action figures. Place Mr. Spock or any Star Trek figure into the transporter room. Spin the control knob and press the button. Mr. Spock disappears. Pretend he's left the deck of the Enterprise for outer space adventure. You can capture the Klingon and bring him back to the Enterprise. Star Trek USS Enterprise gift set. Star Trek action figures also sold separately by Mego.
Oh, I know we've played that before, but it just seemed appropriate this time around. But I got to tell you, Mr. Spock disappears.
The Klingon. Because there's only one Klingon.
Oh, is that funny? Well, last episode, Kelly and I sort of geeked out when we talked about the AMT model kits from the 70s, but I kind of have a feeling that this week's show might take us to an all-new high on the geekorometer. Yeah, we're talking about Star Trek toys from the 1970s.
Yeah, let's go ahead and get started.
Yeah, well, for the sake of having some sort of order in this conversation that I don't think is going to have any order at all, really. I kind of broke the toys down into 4 categories. Action figures, handheld toys, ships, and then just sort of miscellaneous stuff. And there was quite a bit of miscellaneous
Stuff. Well, hey, why don't we start with action figures?
I like that. But before we do, I just wanted to make this little note. About the term action figure. It didn't exist in the 1970s. In fact, there was not a good name for these types of toys, if you remember, that boys played with. A lot of guys, like my older brother, called them dolls. Oh, don't call them dolls. Man, I'm not playing with dolls. This is Captain Kirk. It's not a doll.
Well, thank God somebody invented the term action figure.
God, I know. Just came like 10 years too late, though.
Yeah, just a little. In the 70s, there was only one producer of Star Trek figures, or dolls. And it was Mego.
Mego was awesome in the 70s. They created so much stuff for Star Trek. Let's start with the action figures. First of all, did you have any, Kelly?
I'm embarrassed to say that pretty much the only thing I had on this list of toys, with one exception, was action figures.
Okay, so you did have some Mego action figures.
I did.
Let's dive in and talk about them first. So let's give a little bit of info, and then we'll kind of talk about them. So there were 3 different waves or series of action figures that Mego released, starting around 1975. The first series was called the Bridge Crew. That included Kirk, Spock, McCoy, Uhura, Scotty, and a Klingon. I don't know what happened to Chekhov. Apparently 2 seasons wasn't enough. And then there was the Alien series, which involved a Charon If you remember, they're half black on one side, half white on the other. The Keeper from the Menagerie and the Cage. A Gorn. Interestingly enough, the Gorn is dressed in a uniform that looks a lot like a Klingon uniform.
Yeah.
And a Neptunian. And let's all be honest here, there were no Neptunians on the show. So how this is a Star Trek alien, I'm not sure. But we've got the Neptunian there, too.
Is it canon?
I can't think that it would be, huh?
I don't think so.
I don't think so. And then there was a third alien, a second alien series, a third wave that included an Andorian, a Mugato, a Romulan, and a Telosian, similar to the Keeper. So we have another sort of Keeper character, different design though. Pretty cool though that Mego got into that much detail.
Yeah, and if you're looking for collecting any of these now, look for those aliens because they are hard to find and considered gold.
So if you played with these guys, you know that first of all they're made of plastic and that they had clothes. So you had like these little knit tops and the pants for the guys. The guys all had their boots molded to the bottom of their legs. So their boots did not come off. So if you strip them down naked, and let's face it, we all did that. We just had to know, didn't we? Anybody want to say that they didn't strip their guy naked? Anyone? Okay.
I didn't.
I don't believe you. So all the guys had blue undies underneath their uniforms, which I'm really, really glad they had something on under there. Because, when you stripped your G.I. Joe, and all of you who played with G.I. Joe know what I'm saying here, there was nothing. There was nothing.
Nothing.
Yeah, hopefully you understand when I say that. I mean, there was nothing.
There was absence of stuff.
Joe was tough, but not in all areas of his life. Anyway, so Kirk and Spock and Scotty and the guys, they had blue undies, but unfortunately there was some sort of horrible transporter accident and their boots are molded to the end of their legs. The pants fit great. They went right over top of the boots, so there was no issue there. Getting the shirt on and off, a little bit of a hassle. Remember those weird little snaps?
Yes.
Yes. And they never stayed on, the uniforms. And my mom ended up sewing them back on, and. And then there was the other thing about the uniforms that I didn't like is that the Arrowhead insignia was just a sticker.
Yes. And
do you remember how the silver, it was sort of a silver chromish, was sort of it was almost like tin foil, I guess. It was some kind of foil that came off of the insignia. So it didn't stay on the insignia very, very long. It sort of peeled away. And then you had this dull gray insignia that didn't stay on much longer after that. That was the downside, at least, for me. That was the downside of the uniforms and the figures. What about you, Kelly?
Yeah, the phaser and the belt that holds the phaser.
Oh, my gosh.
I kept losing the phaser.
Yes. You'd work up this great adventure, and it was Kirk fighting the Klingon, and it was time for him to pull out his phaser, and oh crap, where the hell's the phaser?
Right.
Or the communicator. You remember trying to put the little communicator in their hands?
I don't even remember the communicator. I must have lost it like when I opened the package.
The communicator was like a bar of soap. And, of course, the top didn't flip up. It was really a molded piece of plastic with the top down. And so you had to pretend as a kid, not only do I have to pretend that these guys are real now and that, the foil didn't fall off the insignia, but now I have to also imagine that the lid does flip up on the communicator when it really just looks like a blue piece of soap. But anyway, you would try to wedge the blue piece of communicator soap into their hands, and sometimes it would flip out because it didn't want to stay there. And then if you had shag carpeting, like many of our homes did in the 70s, anybody remember shag carpeting? Yeah.
Orange shag, green shag.
How many? This is a great question. How many homes with shag carpeting had embedded into the shag small little communicator soaps and phasers? I wonder.
All of them.
Seriously, those little tiny plastic toys and shag just didn't get along.
No.
What else about the guys, Kelly, that did you like?
No, I sort of liked, I mean, I had Spock, had to have Spock, and he had the tricorder and it kind of looped over his neck.
Mm-hmm.
That one actually I never lost. So
That's right. That's right. As long as it stayed on his neck, we were in good shape.
yeah, well, you couldn't really put it in his hands because you got this loopy plastic thing that kind of sticks up and screws up the whole scene.
How about the belt? Did you have any problems getting the belt fastened around your guys?
Oh God, yes.
Do you remember that?
Oh yeah.
For whatever reason, wasn't it like a little piece of arrowhead plastic that went through a little square,
Yep.
and it just wouldn't go.
No.
Come on, I want to play. I can't get in there. Get in there. Get in there.
Well, this is why I'm saying I didn't take the clothes off of mine, because once it was on, I wasn't taking that sucker off.
I just find that then you must have been looking down the pants. I know you looked.
Okay.
I know you
So
peeked.
who didn't?
Okay,
At
fair
the,
enough.
The Starfleet provisioned underwear.
You had to look. All right, and then there's Uhura. All right, everybody raised their hand that looked. Thank you. That's all I'm going to say.
Online.
That's all I'm going to say. So Uhura, I mean, when you play, if you had the Uhura action figure, I almost said doll, action figure, her arms were lots more spindly, and Uhura broke her arm when a Klingon very aggressively went after her once. And when I say she broke her arm, I mean the Klingon broke it clear off. So my Uhura continued her life with an empty sleeve on the right side because of a very aggressive Klingon. I think he was trying to make moves on her, and she didn't like it.
Wow. Early Star Trek abuse.
Yes, exactly. Hey, let's talk about some of the cool Mego play sets for these action figures, though. There were 4 of them. And, of course, probably the most famous is the Enterprise Bridge set. Now, I didn't have this. Did you have this?
No, I didn't have that. I wish I did.
I had a friend who had it. And so occasionally it was, family friends, and we would get together, I don't know, 3 times a year or 4 times a year. But I knew that I'm going to take my guys over because he's got the Bridge play set. And so, it'd be like, hey, man, what do you want to do? We're playing with your Bridge play set. Now shut up. Let's go to the basement.
I'm going with or without you.
That was pretty much it. He'd be like, yeah, but I got this new, no, I'm playing with the Bridge set. I don't care what you're going to do. Just get me to the Bridge set. Where do you keep it? So that's what I did. I played with the Bridge set because it was cool. The transporter was on the bridge, which, let's face it, we all knew that was anatomically incorrect. See, I use the word anatomically to describe the Bridge play set, but not the G.I. Joe. I couldn't bring myself to say it then. Anyway, we all know that the transporter wasn't supposed to be on the Bridge play set. However, we bought into it, let's face it, because it was Star Trek, and we were just happy to have the Bridge set. I really liked how that worked, though. You put your guy in the transporter, and you kind of spun it, and he came out the backside. Very cool. Lots of fun.
And Spock disappears.
Those commercials were so bad.
Yeah.
But they're fun. Aren't they fun to listen to them now?
Oh, especially now.
Yes.
Back then, we didn't think anything.
No, not at all. We didn't. We just, oh, cool, the Klingon disappears. The other very cool and very well-known playset is the one called Mission to Gamma 6. And this is the playset that includes the big head of Vol. Now, there are no people of Vol. It's just Vol. And you get to mess around and play around Vol's big dinosaur-like head. It was 18 inches high. It had 4 gamma creatures. So actually they are little. They come up to like the knee of our Mego guys. So they're much littler figures. There were these dinosaur gloves. So you have the Vol face and sort of the platform that your guys could walk up to. But then on the side in a rock face, there are these little gloves that have like this reptilian look to them. And kids could put their hands through the back side of the playset into the gloves and grab Spock. Vol has grab Spock.
And Spock disappears.
There were okay, so here's what it says on the box. You operate the clutching cave glove creature. Movable jaws, glow-in-the-dark eyes, gamma plant trap, secret trapdoor floor, subterranean cave dwelling. So that's mission to Gamma 6. I don't know why. You know what? And even now, they made the mission to Gamma 6 playset, but they never offered an action figure that was in the form of the people of Vol. Why is that? They should have had someone with the little antenna behind his ear and
they
the
should
white
have.
hair. But I wonder, do you remember the exploding rocks that were on that planet? And that the people of Vol would pick up and throw in Vol's mouth, and that would create energy for Vol. I wonder if those were in the playset.
What I read, I don't think so.
Well,
Could be wrong.
What was they used to have in this playset?
It was a scene for Star Trek.
Don't you wish you understood why they picked that one? Like you were in on that meeting. Now we're going to make a Star Trek playset. Which one should we do?
We should do something from one of the series that's iconic. It just stands out.
Okay, we can't stay on this all day.
No,
we can't. There was also a telescreen console, which was sort of like sitting in, I always thought it was sort of like sitting in the auxiliary control room, where there was the big screen and there was a little desk and your figure could sit there and basically watch Friends or, whatever, the Mod Squad or whatever they wanted to at the time. Dragnet.
And do you remember that being advertised?
Dragnet? I do.
No.
The telescreen console?
Yes.
Yeah. Vaguely I do. Not a lot. Not like Mission to Gamma 6, but I do sort of remember it. And do you remember then there was a standalone transporter room as well?
Well, I didn't remember that. I always thought it was with the bridge, which is anatomically incorrect.
Nice use of the word. Go ahead.
Yes. But of course, Big Bang Theory.
Right. Right. So there was sort of like standalone. Yeah.
Right. And what I read up on that, when it came on Big Bang, and I guess it was like a British only thing.
Oh, really?
The standalone transporter.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. Well, there you go.
So there you go.
Go figure. The Mego line was very, very cool. Lots of fun. And they were the only action figures in the 70s. There was not another line of action figures. So if you wanted to play with Kirk and Spock and all the other guys, you had to buy a Mego. And they were very cool at the time. Mego also made, and if you grew up in the 70s, you probably remember this, Mego also made an entire line of Marvel figures and DC figures. So you could get Spider-Man and Captain America. I think there was a Superman and Batman, even a Wonder Woman. So there was an entire line of action figures made by Mego that you could get. All of them, their uniforms, you could take their uniforms off. So, there was a time when I had a Batman and a Superman, and they were wearing each other's clothes.
I'm gonna have to have an intervention with you in taking off Doll's clothes.
At the time, it seemed like an okay thing to do.
But you're obsessed with it.
I have to admit, talking about it now, it seems like there may have been some problems that didn't go diagnosed. But I don't want to digress too far. Mego also made, oh my goodness, Mego also made, beyond the action figures and the play sets, some handheld toys. So let's talk about those. The first thing they made was a line of communicators. Now these were, when you look at them today and you look at what's available today, it's hard to believe that these things ever sold. But at the time, in the 1970s, when there were very few Star Trek toys, this was pretty cool. Yeah. So they were basically walkie talkies. They were, if you remember, they weren't black and gold. They were actually blue and navy blue. And they were rather big. They were much, much bigger than what the Star Trek communicator was, because let's face it, transistorized in the 70s still didn't mean, hey, we're shrinking everything down. It was, they were big. They were like what, like 8 inches long by maybe 4 inches across?
Yeah, and about 2 or 3 inches thick.
And for whatever, yeah, right. And for whatever reason, they couldn't figure out how to make the flip top open all the way. I mean, it only opened at what, about 45-degree angle?
Yeah.
Instead of flipping back past 90 like the regular communicator does. And so you'd play with this thing and you try to open it. And it's like, it's not opening all the way. Come on, man. I'm Kirk. I'm trying to be cool here. Come on, open up. And then, of course,
on top of it, hey, I can't hear you. And you put it up against your head. And
yes. And you had to open up the antenna. Kirk did not have to open up an antenna. What gives? But yet it was still cool. It was.
So did you see the commercial for this one?
Yes.
The kid, it's cracking me up. They're on a bike and they stop because it's going off, or they pretend to go off. And he's holding it like so close to his ear because like you can't hear it, can you?
Right.
You just.
Right, exactly. And let's face it, he had to stop too because it took 2 hands to hold the monster thing.
Right. It was bigger than his head.
That's right. It wasn't like pulling out your iPhone 7 today and playing with it. You know, this thing was huge.
And I really wanted those. I never got them, but I really wanted those.
Again, had a friend who had them, got to play with them a little, but I didn't have one of those. Mego also made a command communication console. It was basically just a little console with some big buttons on it that would tie into the communicators / walkie-talkies. It was like a home base.
Yeah, and I never saw this one. I saw the walkie-talkies as a kid, but I never saw this.
Yeah, it was an interesting idea. I guess maybe it was supposed to be, Uhura's station or something like that. But yeah, we never saw anything like it on the show. I think you're right too. I don't think it's sold in all markets. I think it was limited. So go figure. Do you remember the Mego tricorder?
I remember the tricorder, yes.
1975, Mego comes out with a tricorder. And again, this sucker's big. I mean, it was big.
Yeah.
And if you grew up in the 70s and you remember the size of a cassette player, that's what this thing was. And then they took a cassette player and they had to put it inside of a housing that looked like a tricorder. So it had to become that much bigger. And that's really all this thing was. It was a cassette player with the top flipped open like a tricorder did, and it had some pretend buttons, but it also had the eject, stop, play, rewind functions for the cassette.
Yep. And it was blue, that same blue as the communicators.
Right, exactly. It wasn't black, it was blue. Really big. But again, if you had one, you were in heaven because you had this cool Star Trek toy that nobody else had.
Well, if you're going to have a cassette player, it should be a tricorder.
That's right. Absolutely. It's the weirdest thing. I got a cassette recorder in like 1975. It was made by this weird company named Sony, I think.
Sony,
yeah.
Huh.
I don't know. I never heard of them before, but I used it to record a lot of Star Trek episodes and play them back later. There was this scarcity mentality. I don't know when Star Trek's going to go off the air, so I'm going to record these in case it does, and then I'll always have them. I don't know about you, but I always had that scarcity mentality when it came to Star Trek things too. Like, I don't know when this could ever be made again because let's face it, nobody likes Star Trek. So I'm going to get it or find a way to get it because it may never come around again. Now here we are, 50 years later, 40 years later. There's part of my brain that still does that.
Well, I think they've demonstrated several times over the franchise history that it just goes away.
It sometimes just goes away, especially if you like to take the clothes off of it. Hey, let's talk about the Mego Trekulator. Yes, this was a real toy. It was a working calculator made up to look like the tricorder, the big cassette player tricorder, not the real tricorder on the show. But it was a working calculator. So you could get a trekulator and you could do your homework with it, except in those days we weren't allowed to use calculators. So maybe not. So you could do some odd computations.
Funky design, too, from what we're typically used to, right?
It was. It wasn't the traditional design of a 70s calculator. Yeah, it was kind of had that angled screen and the buttons were really large and it was like almost made for a toddler instead of a 10-year-old. But
yep.
Thank you, Mego, for the trekulator. The name alone,
I think, must have had this blue plastic just in storage somewhere.
Yes.
Because it was the same blue.
Yeah, and can you imagine these guys at Mego sitting in a meeting saying, okay, we've made the communicators, we've made the communication console, and we've made a tricorder from a cassette player. What can we do next?
A calculator.
How about a trekulator, sir? Trekulator.
A trekulator.
They really ran out of ideas on that one. Let's call it a trekulator. The kids will love it. All right, let's move on.
Yes.
Mego also made a Super Phaser 2 target game. This was actually pretty cool. This is sort of like an early version of laser tag, where the phasers fired a light. It was not a laser, but it was a light. And if I remember, you wore like targets, or you had targets that you could put up and shoot the targets. Kind of cool.
Was it just kind of like a reflector or something?
Yeah, that's what I kind of remember too. And I think I watched the commercial last week. I saw the commercial on YouTube. And it was like a picture of a Klingon battle cruiser and then this big reflector in the middle of it.
Right.
Hit the reflector, kid. It's only 10 inches across.
But when you're hitting it with just a flashlight, essentially, it's kind of cool.
Yeah. There were some other phaser toys in the 70s too, not made by Mego, but by a company called Remco. We got lots of interesting phaser toys in the 70s. They made one called the Transistorized Electronic Phaser Gun. That's a heck of a title. Again, all of these look a little like the phaser, but they're also sort of like, how would you say, bastardized versions, or they've been morphed out of their original shapes somehow. And that's what this Remco phaser looks like too.
Super mod.
Yeah, right. It also projected. When I say also, it projected images on the wall, and then you could shoot at the images with little flying discs. So that's loads and loads of fun. I don't care who you are or where you're at.
And this one had this funky Star Trek name
logo,
on the side,
right? And the logo was is that the same logo that was on the Gold Key comics?
Yes, that's what it looks like.
I wonder why they
Yes.
didn't use the show logo with that font.
They got the license. You'd think
Right.
they'd be allowed to.
Yeah, I don't know. You know, the Mission to Gamma 6 playset had it. Come
Right.
on. If Gamma 6 can have it, why can't the phaser?
Yeah. Hey, Remco, you can license this from us, but you can't use our name or our font.
Our font and our logo. No, forget it. Remco also made a phaser that just shot a disc. So if you didn't need to project the images, boom, just shoot the disc at people. Whoever you want to shoot them at. Your little sister. Hey, got you in the eye. Watch out.
Yep.
You shoot your eye out, kid. And then Remco also made a phaser water gun. So, you know, that's the next best thing right there. If you can not shoot real amplified phased energy, then let's shoot some water.
It's comparable.
It's comparable. At least when you're 10, it is.
Yes.
Right. And in
Take that outside, Bobby.
That's right. Stop shooting me with water. It's not a phaser, you dumb kid. And in the coolest thing, though, in 1975, Remco came out with the Star Trek utility belt.
Yes.
This was very cool. This was as if you're going out on a mission, and it included a belt, a phaser, a communicator, and a tricorder. And Remco had made a bunch of belts. They made a utility belt for Batman with a bunch of stuff. Then it got kind of weird because they kind of took the idea of the Star Trek utility belt and painted them green and came out with a Hulk utility belt.
Right.
They had what was the tricorder, but they called it something different. They had the communicator, which was, let's face it, it was a communicator, but it was green. And you're like, what does Hulk need a Star Trek communicator for? I don't know. I can only imagine Hulk getting his utility belt and saying, Hulk smash!
Communicator gone, tricorder gone.
Right. And then Hulk laughing and jumping, 10 miles away.
Right. That's the one I had.
Did you have that?
Yeah, I don't know what happened to the belt or the phaser. Those disappeared quickly, but the communicator, just flipping the lid was, I had a ball, I guess, with that.
And it made the sound.
Yes.
That you heard on the show when Kirk closed the communicator, sort of that hollow clunk. When you closed that communicator from the utility belt, it made the same sound. And you're like, yeah. This is real. All right. Oh, we're having so much fun. Okay, let's talk about ships. Weren't, this to me is an obvious toy. You've got the Enterprise. The only ships that we could play with, for the most part, were the AMT models. And let's face it, you're not supposed to play with models, but we did anyway.
Right.
So if you want to talk about AMT models, go back to the previous episode. However,
episode 24.
That's right. However, there was one manufacturer that did make 2 ships, and it was Dinky Toys. And Dinky made a die-cast Enterprise and a die-cast Klingon battle cruiser. They're not to scale. Again, they're sort of bastardized versions that look like they're cousins rather than the original thing. I'm holding I do have a Dinky Enterprise. The saucer section is too small, the lower engineering section is too long, and the engines are too short. So if you can imagine the Enterprise and do what I just described to you, you've got basically the Dinky Enterprise. But it's a Star Trek Enterprise. This guy shot, instead of phasers, shot little discs. It would be loaded in the back of the saucer, and then you could shoot them the front at, your sister or your mom and dad or whoever.
Now, I never had this. Does it, and you have it in your hand, does it shoot the disc? Is it a spring loaded or is it battery or?
Yeah, it's spring.
Okay.
You kind of moved it into position and it clicked into position and then you could fire it. But what this toy does have that's very, very cool. and it strays from obviously the original Enterprise. It has bay doors at the bottom of the engineering hall. So if you can imagine those bay doors, one on each side opening up. First of all, when you open them up, it creates a great stand for the thing. So you can actually put it down because these bay doors are open and they hold the ship up in an upright position. So that's very cool. But inside of the bay doors then is a little plastic shuttlecraft. And there's a hole in the middle of the shuttlecraft, and it sits on a little spindle. You just kind of push it up on this little rod, and it sits inside there. But that's kind of cool, you know. You can pull the little shuttle out, and you can have a little adventure with the shuttle, and then shuttle can come back and dock, and you can close the bay doors.
Cool.
Yeah, very cool. Now, I never owned the Klingon battle cruiser. As an adult, I've been looking for one. Just 'cause. So
I think he's soliciting the audience.
if anybody knows of one, let me know. Yeah, I'd love to get my hands on one. I've seen them on eBay at times, and they're very expensive. This guy I picked up for $25. You know, it didn't have a box. It's rather beat up, but that in and of itself kind of gives it some charm. But the stickers are still there. You know, the pieces are there, so very cool. That's all I got for ships.
Yeah,
That's it. There weren't very many other, ships.
well, there's one more pseudo ship that we'll talk about in a minute.
Why don't you bring it up now? Go ahead.
With the Controlled Space Flight Enterprise, or CSF.
Yeah, and this guy kind of falls in that a ship and also the sort of miscellaneous category that you're not sure where to put it. Why don't you talk about it? Go ahead. Well,
so this, if in the 70s, you know, there wasn't really remote control planes or helicopters like, you know, are a dime a dozen now. You had, if you had a plane, it was on a string and you just spun around outside. Or you had a little helicopter that was attached to basically a pole, and it would go up and down and around in a circle. And usually these things had a hook on the bottom, so you could try and maneuver it in, because there was two controls, an up, down, and a forward and back button, and you would try and hook on these things. Well, they did one of the USS Enterprise.
So cool, isn't it? I mean, did you have a vertibird or a toy like this growing up?
My parents wouldn't spring for it, so I got a Joe generic helicopter instead.
Okay, I had a vertibird, and I think it was a Mattel. I think it was a Mattel product. And this the CSF Enterprise is a knockoff of the vertibird, but it works the same way, like you said. It's got a little fan that lifts up the really light Enterprise and spin it around and pick things up. But it's such a cool toy.
It is.
It really is, because you're actually in control of this thing. And depending on how you move the controls, you tilt it forward and it takes off, or you tilt it backwards and it goes backwards, and you can slow it and hover it. And for kids, this is probably your first real experience with a helicopter kind of toy. So it's really cool.
And they're fun.
Lots of fun.
I spent hours with it.
I did too. I as I said, I had the original vertibird. If you don't know what we're talking about, just go search vertibird, VERTI bird, BIRD, and you'll see it. It's really cool. Vertibird included. Do you remember this? It included a Mercury space capsule, an astronaut, and a raft. So he's basically in the ocean, and the vertibird comes along and picks up the astronaut, takes him to safety. Now, do you remember the next version of the vertibird? It was the vertibird system on a boat, on a ship.
Oh yes.
I don't know how I got it, but I was so lucky. I got one of those. I think my dad liked flying things, and that's why he indulged in me. And there was a helipad on the back of the ship, and the controls were on the front of the ship. And so you would fly around the ship, and you'd pick up the astronaut again, or a buoy or whatever, and that was cool. That was
That
a lot
was.
of fun. Good times.
Good times.
Good times. Let's talk about some other toys that sort of fall into this miscellaneous category. AHI made a whole line of skydiving characters, parachutist characters, and they were little green army guys, or they made a Spider-Man that had a, you would throw him and the chute would open. And they also made a Kirk and a Spock. So there were there was these Kirk and Spock toys that you would throw off the steps or outside or whatever, and the chute would open up, and you would stand there and go, "Wow, look at the chute." Or the chute wouldn't open, and he would dive into the dirt, and you'd be like, "Oh crap, the chute didn't open," and that was.
Or you'd climb as high as you could somewhere and see how high you could throw it up.
But that was the experience of these toys. It was, all right, I'm going to let it go. And the chute would open and you'd be like, wow. When you think about it, you think about that experience as a kid and you think about it as an adult, I was like, man, we were pretty easily entertained, weren't we?
Yes, we were. We're lucky we had electricity.
Yeah,
kids.
right. And the parachutist toy was one of those toys that I think a kid played with for 5 minutes and then said, "This is boring. Let's find something else to do. I know. Let's burn the guy with a match."
Or slingshot, firecracker, match, light, shoot.
Let's set him on fire and see how long the chute lasts. And then throw him in the air. Yep. Yeah, exactly. That when you have a toy that's got a 5-minute life, then bad things start to happen. So, there you go. There was also, this is the one that I kind of scratched my head about. Do you remember Colorforms in the 70s?
Yes, they're flat dolls.
Yeah, these little flat dolls with like a plastic covering, and then you would take plastic clothing, and because of static, they would stick, basically like an early static sticker, and you could play dress up with these little flat dolls. And my sisters had them. Well, there was a Star Trek Colorform set. I can't imagine what the hell was going on with that thing and who played with it. But there was, there it was. It was the setting was like a bridge. There was, and you could put your guys on the bridge and they could hold a phaser or hold a communicator or whatever.
Yeah.
That one kind of escapes me. I never played with it. I never had it. I was not a fan of Colorforms as a kid. In my little 10-year-old brain, it was like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. It's Colorforms crap. I got to get away from this. Where are the matches? So as far as, Colorforms go, it just, didn't really hit with me much. Yeah. Here's one. Do you remember the Big Wheel?
Do you know the Big Wheel I never saw?
The Big Wheel by Mattel. Well, there was a Star Trek version called the Star Trek Cycle. Is that wild or what?
It is, looking at pictures of it, it is cool as hell. If I always wanted a big wheel as a kid, never got one. I'm deprived. but if now that I look back, I want to go back and be 7 or 8 again and get that big wheel.
And again, this is one of those that you look at it now and you go, wow, that's cool. But you also kind of look at it and go, who the hell thought of this? And how does that relate to Star Trek?
Right.
But it is cool because if you had one now, you'd clean it up, you'd restore it, you'd put it in the corner of a basement, guy room, man cave, and you'd be like, that's the cool toy right there. I mean, it is. It's cool.
It is. It even has its own designation on the side, like NCC. What is it?
Yes.
720 or something.
Right. It has a different designation. Yep.
It has a control panel on the, on the handlebar, basically. Wild stuff. So there's one more that we didn't talk about beforehand that I just sort of saw and I want to bring up real quick. It was called the Star Trek helmet. Yes.
Actually, I'm sorry. It was the official Star Trek helmet, Space Fun helmet.
Space Fun, right.
This was a helmet with a visor that went across your eyes. On the top of it was an orange siren light that spun. Behind that was a weird shaped antenna. And then across the front of the helmet said Spock, as if Spock wore this all the time. First of all, this is the freakiest looking helmet I've ever seen. It never appeared in the series. This kid's got a weird grin on his face wearing it. And to put Spock's name across the top of it, I think, is really dumb. That's my rant about the Star Trek helmet. Anything you want to add?
We're not judging.
We're not judging. Anything you want to add about the Star Trek helmet?
Pretty much not any more than what you've already said. Other than I looked at it, I'm like, I never saw it back in the 70s. I look at him like, oh my gosh, I am so glad my daughter grew up in, let's just call it the future. That's the
Is it me or does the
stupidest thing I've ever seen?
Yes. Is it me or does that kid have a weird smile on his face?
Oh my God.
It's like I'm wearing a Spock helmet. You know what it reminds me of? All right, in the movie A Christmas Story, when the kids are standing in line at the department store to see Santa Claus, and that weird kid with the goggles comes up to him and he says, I like Santa Claus. And Ralphie's like, get the hell away. That's what the smile on that kid looks like.
Oh my gosh. Well, when I was a kid, we had something similar, but it was just a yellow like beanie with a siren light at the top of it. And I'm like, I don't ever want to wear it again. But my mom thought it was the coolest thing and had to get it for us.
Imagine that. Yeah, the adults who came up with this stuff are the same adults who thought it was fun and cool and whatever.
Yeah.
Hey, I think that wraps up our look at Trek toys from the 70s. If you've got some special memories about Trek toys, I hope you'll leave us a comment at our Facebook page. It's facebook.com/70s Trek. Next time we get together, we'll be looking at Gene Roddenberry's return to Paramount in 1975.
See you then.
Thanks for listening to 70s Trek, an independent fan production. Join us next week as we explore more about the production, the actors, the producers, and the influencers of Star Trek in the lost decade of the 1970s on 70s Trek.